Hi, Algebra 1. We didn't completely get finished with notes today in class, so I just wanted to make sure we could summarize and clarify the point of the game that we did today. So the idea with the cards and being able to guess like what the two numbers were that were under the cards was this zero product property. And so I want you to add this to your notes. What it says is if you have the product of two factors that equal 0, and we don't know what those two factors are, then either A has to equal 0 or B has to equal 0. Okay. And didn't we just decide that in class? When this was any other number, like the 6 or -2 or 1, I could have put any number I wanted underneath those two cards. But if it was equal to 0, you knew for a fact that one of the factors had to be 0. Okay, so as just a really easy example, if we had 5x equals 0, what do you know x has to be? X has to be 0, right? Because algebraically, if we were to divide by 5, we get x equals 0. Okay, 5 times what number would equal 0? Well, the only thing that would make that equal 0 is 0. Okay, so how this applies to what we have been doing. We've been looking at solving quadratics. And one method that we've been looking at has been factoring. So how do you take a quadratic or something that's to degree 2 and factoring it? So let's say I have a quadratic and I factor it into its two factors, x and x plus 5. Okay. And I have an equation and I'm wondering what values of x would make this equation true. Okay, based on this zero product property, I have two factors, and I know either that first factor has to equal 0 or the second factor has to equal 0. So the first factor is x. I know that x has to equal 0, or my second factor is x plus 5. That factor could have equaled 0. Okay, either one or the other or both factors has to equal 0 for this equation to make sense. Okay, x equals 0 is done. We can't solve anything with that. But x plus 5 equals 0, we would subtract 5 and get x equals -5. So we have a solution set of 0 and -5. Okay, so there's two values that we found that would make this equation true. Okay. So just to check our answers, what if I put 0 into this equation? Would it make it a true statement? Okay, that would look like 0 times 0 plus 5. Does that equal 0? Okay, well 0 is 0, 0 plus 5 is 5, 0 times 5 is 0, so that works. How about if I put in -5? If I substitute -5 in for x, that would look like -5 times -5 plus 5. Would that also equal 0? Order of operations says we should simplify inside our parentheses first. However, you could distribute. You should get the same final answer. Okay. -5 times -5 plus 5 is 0. And -5 times 0 is 0. So we have two values that would make this equation true. That's why we have two solutions here. Okay. So let's try another example. Let's try if we had x plus 3 and x minus 1 and it equals 0. Okay. We have two factors and we're wondering what values of x would make this equation equal to 0. Okay. Based on the zero product property, I know one of these factors has to be equal to 0. So I can say either x plus 3 has to equal 0 or x minus 1 has to equal 0. So subtract 3, x equals -3. Or add 1, x equals 1. So we have two solutions, -3 or 1. Okay. This is nice and it's pretty easy actually when it's factored. But what about a problem when you have like x squared plus 6x plus 8 equals 0? This doesn't quite fit the zero product property, right? Because we don't have two factors. We don't know what are the two things that would multiply to equal 0. And this is where what we were just working on before your quiz is so important, okay? We want to factor x squared plus 6x plus 8. So this is a trinomial, and there's no greatest common factor. So we're going to set up our factor pairs and look for a factor pair of 8 that will add to 6. So what two numbers will add to 8 and add to 6? We get 4 and 2. So we get plus 4 and plus 2. Okay. So by factoring, it will allow us to write any quadratic as a product of two factors. So we can say x plus 4 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0 based on the zero product property. One of those two factors has to equal 0. So x equals negative 4 or x equals negative 2. Okay. And let's try one more. Let's try example 5. 5x squared plus 15x equals 0. Again, this is not factored. I can't set each term equal to 0 because it has to be a product of two things that equal 0. So I want to try and factor the left-hand side. First, look for a greatest common factor. These two terms will share 5 and x. So if we factor out 5x, we're left with x plus 15x divided by 5x is 3. So in this case, we have a couple factors. 5 and x are two factors, but we can think about them as just one. And then x plus 3 is another factor. So we'll say either 5x equals 0 or x plus 3 equals 0. Okay. Divide by 5. 0 divided by 5 is 0. Subtract 3, x equals negative 3. So solutions of 0 and negative 3. So this new method of solving quadratics involves trying to factor your quadratic into two factors. And then by the zero product property, we set each factor equal to 0 and solve. And that will allow you to find two separate solutions. Okay, good luck with tonight's homework.